My grandfather was Jim Horgan, and he had two brothers, Tom and Phil, and they were early film pioneers. They started making films. The earliest one is 1904, when Prince Edward and Queen Alexandra came to Lismore. So they were aware of Lumiere brothers. I don't know how they. My grandmother came from America, so I think they got a lot of ideas, and they used to get magazines from America. So I think this is how they started, really. But they did get some sort of projector from Lumiere brothers, and they added on some part so that they were able to do the moving films. They had magic lantern shows, so they used to go to Clashmore and all the surrounding areas in Youghal. They used to actually cycle, and we have a great photograph of all the equipment they had to bring to these places. So they show the magic lantern slides in these different areas. They opened the cinema then in 1917, but I think they got the license a lot earlier. They got the license about 1914 or 13 or 14. They actually played for the silent movies. So we have a great photograph of my father playing violin. He was about 10, and my grandfather he was playing violin as well, and an uncle playing banjo, and my aunt playing piano. And a few more local people. Sylvie Rohan, you might know, he played violin as well. My grandfather used to go to parties to Perks, so they used to have great musical evenings. I remember Jumbo telling me about my grandfather. He played cello, so Jumbo played violin, he played cello, and my aunt played piano, and they used to have great nights. Well, they filmed all the local events. They filmed things like processions. They filmed, well, as I said, Edward and Alexandra. That's probably one of the earliest ones. My grandfather made this little animation of the clock gate, where the clock gate does a little dance. And they filmed rallies. I think there was some Sinn Féin rally in Cork. They filmed the, what are they called? The men who came back from Wormwood Scrubs, who were hunger strikers. They filmed these, and they also have some great photographs from 1914 of the Irish Volunteers. But they were sort of like news items at the time, I suppose, really. They filmed people coming out of the church. Actually, my two great-grandmothers are in a film coming out of the parish church. It was when my father died that we discovered we had these films, because luckily enough, he kept all these. He had a special, he kept them in a room, a cold room, where he preserved them for us. So after he died, we discovered all these, so it was a very exciting discovery. Well, we knew all the time that we had the photographs, and he actually showed me the film of the clock gate, the little one, and he had found some machine that he could work it on. So he said, "Oh, this little thing isn't much good, so we might as well I can show it to you. It doesn't matter if it." He didn't realise that it was actually a very important piece of film. He thought it was just something my grandfather had done for a bit of fun. They used it in some college in Japan, where each student had to use this as their starting piece for their exam, and they had to make up a little animation based on this. We've seen them all, yeah, they're very interesting. He had a great sense of humour. He was a really funny person, so he loved doing things like this, Even as a child, I can remember him scribbling little cartoons, and on a piece of paper, and flicking them so that you'd see it like a little animation. Henry Ford visited, and he advised my grandfather when he was building the cinema on how to fund it and all this sort of thing. He advised him on, gave him some great advice, yes, which he followed, as far as I know. And my grandfather also was an artist, so he painted his own. There were soundboards on the side of the cinema, and he painted all of these, so they looked really well. We've never seen those now because it was before my time, but Well, I think it's marvellous because I really am into history, so I just find it fascinating. I actually found this tiny little photograph, it's only about this size, and it was of Lord Carbery flying over the All Volunteers. Lord Carbery was from Rosscarbery, and he had this little plane, which was very unusual. Nobody had a plane in Ireland at that time. And so it was amazing that he could take this photograph. I don't know how, if you think of how he got this photograph, or how he knew, maybe he knew he was flying over that day. So he flew over Youghal, and all the All Volunteers are in the photograph. So I was fascinated when I saw this because I thought it was so interesting. They showed them in the cinema, they showed them each week, I think, as far as I know, yes. And they had a Youghal Gazette, as far as I know, and this was all part of the news from Youghal for the week, maybe, or it was beginning to deteriorate, and we didn't want to lose any of it, so we were lucky. The Cork Library have the photographs, and we've sent the films to the Film Institute, Film Archives. But one thing that we need to do is get the older generation to recognise all the people and to give their stories about it. I think that's very important, because even 15 years ago when we started showing them, people would come up and be very excited and say, that's my father, that's such and such, but people are now, that generation have moved on, and it's harder to identify.
We are the Perks Entertainment family.
That's right.
Of course, it was an adventure, and we'd have the loads, as we talked about, which were the trailers which carried all the rides and games. And they'd be built up and pulled down in each town and travel on, and the workmen and my father and my mother and her father and her mother and all the family would be part of it, and we would be part of it. No matter how small you were part of it. They loved
building
it.
up and everything, and it was just so exciting, really, for us as well as kids, because everybody wanted to play with us, you know, which was great.
So when we hit the town, I mean, immediately people came out and came down to the grounds. We used to call it the grounds, that was the site we were on, and we'd build up, and everybody in the town, or a lot of people in the town, would come down to watch. And you know, if you wanted packing for one of the, wood for one of the games or stalls, they'd be running over to help you, and mad to be part of it, mad to be part of it.
There'd be darts, and then there was the spinner, of course. There was darts, rollerball, hoopla, which is what I learned first. That's what you went on first when you were small, because you could pick up the rings. So at least you were useful to do that, you know what I mean? And that was the stall side of it. And the spinner, which would be like the Delft stall as they would have at fairs nowadays, at Sailor Works and stuff like that.
It was fantastic. When you think about it that far back, and even at that far back, before we were even born, there was a type of wall of death. But I mean, in those days it was horrific to ride a wall of death. As time passes now, motorcycles or wall of death bikes have been made much more amenable to use and been geared down and geared up. But in those days, long ago, when my father and her father and mother and my mother were on the road travelling, the bikes they had were ordinary bikes they made themselves, and it was one hell of a job to stay up in that wall, Yeah. A mobile dodgems was much the same as the ones now. Once they got down the flooring, which was called the plates, there were steel plates. That was the connection between that and the wiring at the top, the net wiring.
The netting. Yeah.
That was one of my jobs, was the dodgems. Hold on tight, here we go, and all the rest of it, and no head-on bumping. But that was basically I spent a lot of time on rides end of it, and I mean, once they were going, once they were even building up, people were watching. But they had to do it quickly but they did it efficiently because they were so used to it. The staff were so used to it. And what's more is the people who were owners of it, the bosses, Stella's father, my brother George, Neddy, my other brother John L, Corrie, all of us knew exactly what each ride did and where it went and the precise equipment that is needed and the safety. Like before health and safety came out, we were much safer when you think about it today. So at any rate, that's exactly how it went to build up. Auntie Queenie,
yeah,
who was both our father's sister. And she was mad into photography.
Yeah.
And my father loved photography, but he was absolutely desperate, useless. But he thought he was great, Lord Snowden, But he was dreadfully take your head and no legs, but he'd have the most up-to-date equipment. But Queenie was a dinger.
She was super.
Yeah. And she
was very creative, wasn't she?
Very. And
fantastic.
Very creative. And she taught my brother George. That's how she got into it. And George was very keen in photography. So she helped him enormously and then he went on a bit further. But she was really super.
She was fantastic at it. I mean, seems part of looking at her movies, it was just fantastic.
But she didn't alone just movie the fun fair. She would go out and movie other aspects that she enjoyed. Like she was a camera buff, that saying. She really enjoyed it and she did it beautifully. She'd do parades that mightn't really have anything to do with the fun fair. She'd do parades and she might do gardens. She loved gardening. And she might do gardens and she'd go places where there were gardens. She didn't drive herself, but she'd get somebody to take her, that sort of thing.
Yeah, she never drove. It's amazing,
Yeah. The Fancy Dress Parade, it was from the square out to, I think, our place in the old showboat area. But it was packed. There must have been about 600 or 700 people entering in it. But it wasn't just kids, it was adults. Elderlies, and it was way ahead of anything I've ever seen in my lifetime. Absolutely super. Everybody really made an effort, really an effort. Well, she got it all. It was fantastic. Like I couldn't believe it when Warren showed it to me. I couldn't believe that people in any town, never mind Joe, would go to so much trouble. And it was obviously a thing then, It was part of the era that fancy dresses were fancy dresses.
And they took it so seriously and everything,
very.
And there was different categories in it, and they really would be very, very serious about it,
Yeah,
big floats and everything. Like you wouldn't even see the likes of it in Paddy's Day parades nowadays.
Yeah, and I think too that we didn't know so much about this until my brother George gave these the cines to Warren, who got this machine, who transferred them to DVDs now. We'd have never seen them. But seeing these now, when we saw them again, brought back such memories. I was there immediately when I saw them. I was right,
absolutely. You're sort of saying, oh my God, I remember that. Do you remember that, Sal? Remember this? Oh, look at that. Do you not remember that, Sal? Do you remember that day? That sort of thing.
My grandson, who's 22 or 23, Caleb, saw them and he was fascinated. Yeah. Is that really how you moved around? And my God, did you have to do all that hard work?
But I suppose it's history, isn't it, when you think of it?
It is.
It's, showbiz history.
Exactly.
Which we started.
Yeah. We're not putting our age down to history. When my father was growing up, my grandfather died when my granny was actually expecting her father. He died at a very young age of throat cancer. And the whole lot of them were destitute virtually. Yeah. So my grandmother used to play the piano in the silent movies. My aunt this is Queenie, used to play the harp, and my father used to play the violin. That was for money for a living to eat. Yeah. Nothing about the movies going round or violin. That was for money to actually make a living. And in those days, making a living that was in Belfast was a very hard thing in those. You're talking about, he was born in 1907. So I said 1914, like they were just going to the 1914-18 war. We have the entire violin, yes, and it sits in a place of honour in my house on the wall. And with lots of lovely, lovely memories. And he played it at every do, didn't he?
Every do. I used to look forward to Uncle Jumbo playing. Oh,
New Year's Eve,
God.
birthday parties, anniversaries, any opportunity he could.
He always had it, have you got, well, no, I don't know, and then it would be produced.
Because of the fact that I loved him so much, and I can remember it's part of my life. The violin was always there. It was always in the wagons. And if Daddy was going anywhere to a party,
Yeah.
it came, and he was always asked to play. He was quite good, you know.
And he used to do monologues as well.
Oh yeah,
He used to do that
monologue.
first before he played the violin, and he'd do a
This was his-
monologue.
The only thing I'd be sad about is if it was today, nowadays, the equipment and the whole scene, like Warren's outlet of the studio and all that, if you could have all that equipment and have done that, you would have seen so much more.
Yeah.
You know, but I think considering the little bit they had, Queenie did fantastically well, and so did Georgie. Considering what they had, the makeshift version,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But if they'd had the razzmatazz that they have today, it would have been
So
fantastic.
much more to see.
Yeah,
Isn't it great that things are?
working.
Yeah,
lovely.
yeah.
It is.
This
It's
stage in
marvellous,
life,
yeah,
it's
this
so
stage.
important, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're mad about each other. It's really
I'm
nice.
glad we sat on this actually. I was
Yeah.
afraid to sit on that.